Welcome to the first video for Unit 7. This unit is motivation, emotion, stress, and personality, and it is a big one in content. It's not quite as large percentage-wise of types of questions that are going to be on the test. However, there is a lot of crap in this unit. And by crap, I mean content. This is actually 2 units, and now we kind of mush them into one. So there's 4 different categories we're going to talk about during this unit: motivation, emotion, stress, and personality. And we're going to look at each of these categories individually. So we're going to start with motivation, and then we will move on to the others. So what is motivation? Well, motivation is the why. Why do we behave in a certain way? Our motivation influences when we start to behave a certain way, how intense we are going to behave, how long we behave that way. So it is the why. Why are we behaving in a certain way? This picture is Aaron Ralston. He is the inspiration for the movie 127 Hours. He was motivated to cut off his arm because he was trapped and because he wanted to survive. So we're going to talk about these whys. Why do we behave in a certain way? As with everything in psychology, there is the biopsychosocial factors that go into motivation, right? So the biological, the cognitive, and the social factors all go into motivation. However, with motivation, we add in one more, and that's those emotional factors that we have that make us do certain things. So some concepts that we're going to be talking about are instincts and incentives. And it's important to know the difference between the two because they both kind of, sound similar. So I want you to just remember the difference between these two. So let's talk instincts first. Instincts, we often think about with animals. Instincts are those innate, automatic responses when we are confronted with a specific stimulus. So, for example, birds instinctually build nests. Salmon instinctually spawn. And when they do these things, they do them perfectly the first time because their genetic code has determined that that's what they are going to do. So what's the problem with this? We know that this is true. We know that animals have these instincts, but the problem comes when we talk about humans, right? Do humans have instincts? Well, we've talked about some things that babies are born with that they can do right out of the womb, right? They can suck, they can turn their head and look for whatever the source is for food. But are these instincts? Maybe, but they go away. Over time, over the first few months, these instinctual behaviors disappear. And so most psychologists now, other than evolutionary psychologists, believe that human behavior is based mostly on our physiological, so our bodily, internal, biological forces, and our psychological forces, not the instinctual forces. So we think about, though, this term instinct, and probably the first thing that comes to mind is like the maternal instinct, right? Or our instinct to survive. So how can we say that instincts don't belong in humans when we have these terms, right? Well, let's think about them. Maternal instinct. Are women destined, like do they automatically, without trying, know how to take care of a child? No. Ask any new mom out there, right? They need to learn those things. They need to learn how to feed their child. They need to learn how to soothe their child. They need to learn how to change a diaper. All of those things don't come automatically. They're learned. Yeah, we're really good learners, so we do it pretty quickly, but they are learned over time. Same thing with the need to survive. Can we just like drop a baby in the wilderness and expect them to survive because they have survival instincts? No, they can't. They're dependent on us, right? So really, humans don't have these instincts that we often talk about. But we do have needs and drives. Needs are what our body requires to survive. Food, water, shelter, sex is actually one of them, right? So like these are basic needs. And these needs bring our body to a level of homeostasis. Homeostasis is a sense of equilibrium, of balance, okay? So we need a certain amount of calories in order to keep our body functioning normally. If we don't have enough of those calories, then our body isn't going to function normally. If we have too many of those calories, our body is not going to function normally. So the need is the idea that we want to keep our body in a nice balanced state, that homeostasis, okay? Drives are controlled by our hypothalamus. Those are the motivators inside of us that help us fulfill our needs. So if our need is for food, what is our drive? Well, our drive is hunger, okay? So our body, our hypothalamus, makes us feel hungry, and then that pushes us to fulfill the need for food, okay? And to add on top of that, we have incentives. Incentives are positive or negative. Excuse Rory. Incentives are positive or negative stimuli that pull us in one way or another. Basically, how are we going to fulfill that need? Let's think food. Our incentive is a specific type of food. So it's the pull towards that type of food. Let's just say pizza, okay? So what is making us want pizza to fulfill our hunger, to fulfill our need for food versus salad, okay? And the value of this incentive, this pull towards pizza, is influenced by biological needs, maybe a vitamin deficiency that we need a specific vitamin from the cheese or from the crust, but it's also influenced by our cognitive factors. I like pizza more than I like salad, so I'm going to be pulled towards pizza to fulfill my need rather than salad, okay? That's incentives. So needs are those basic things that we need: food, water, shelter. Drives are hunger, thirst, fear, and then incentives are what we are going to actually search out and find in order to fulfill that need, okay? Okay, so let's talk about why we do things. So there are 5 different theories of motivation that we are going to talk about. These 5 theories are explaining or are ideas of why we behave in a certain way. And we're going to start with the most basic, and that's the evolutionary theory. And when you think evolutionary theory, you should think about Charles Darwin, the idea of survival of the fittest, right? Our main goal in life is to pass on our genes to offspring. That is our goal, okay? So everything that we do in our life drives us to behave in a certain way that we can reproduce, okay? So what you eat is because you are hoping that your body will be stable enough to reproduce. You putting on makeup is based on you getting a mate, right? So the evolutionary theory is everything is motivated by our need to spread our gene pool, and not only spread our gene pool, but spread the best characteristics, okay? Okay, next one, drive reduction theory. This is kind of going back to that idea of homeostasis, okay? And this is saying that we are motivated to do something. We behave in a certain way because our homeostasis is imbalanced, okay? So let's think about food. Our glucose levels are low, and this creates a need for more glucose, and we get glucose from food. Our brain, our hypothalamus, then creates a drive, hunger, and this prompts us to take action. We need to fulfill that need. We need to get rid of that hunger, therefore we need to act. So I'm going to get food in order to reduce my hunger, okay? So food leads to hunger, leads to eating. The optimum arousal theory kind of builds off of that a little bit, but what this talks about is that arousal, so our body kind of like gearing up, okay, not sexual arousal all the time, sometimes, but not all the time. But arousal is like our body kind of like coming at attention. Our idea is that we behave in a certain way, or we behave our best when the optimum levels of arousal are met. Okay? And this is the Yerkes-Dodson law. And think about food. Okay? Our body is aroused when it's hungry. Okay? Right? Like you can't not think about you being hungry when you're hungry. So our body is aroused, our brain is aroused, our stomach is aroused. And so we perform our best when our body is not like super, super full, right? Because you're tired, you feel really bad, you have a stomach ache. But we also don't perform our best when we're starving, right? Like when all we can think about is food. We perform our best when we've had the right amount of food, but we're not super full. That's the idea of the Yerkes-Dodson law. We also think about it in terms of stress, right? We tend to increase our arousal when we're bored. We tend to try and find things to do when we're bored. But we also try and tone it down a notch if we have too much arousal, if we're stressed, okay? So this is the optimum arousal theory. The next theory is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And what this is saying is that our needs need to be met in a certain order. We need to fulfill these basic needs on the bottom before we can look at doing anything up here on the top of the pyramid, okay? So these basic biological and physiological needs are things like air, food, water, etc., okay? In order for us to even start thinking about safety, protection, security, laws, we need to first fulfill these needs. Think about someone who is living on the streets and is starving. They're not going to think about the laws. They're not going to think about stealing being against the law when they don't have food. They're going to steal the food because they need to eat. Okay? That's the idea here. We need to fulfill these first before we can go to this next one. And we need to fulfill our safety needs first before we can start to have affection or love or relationships. Okay? However, we do not have to have these needs fulfilled 100%. Okay? We just need to have them fulfilled some of the way before we can start thinking about the next thing. So for the average American, we need to have 85% of our biological and physiological needs met in order to start thinking about safety. Okay? 70% of our safety needs met in order to start thinking about belongingness. 50% of our belongingness to be met in order to start thinking about our status, our responsibility, our reputation. And then 40% of that need met in order to start thinking about self-actualization, our personal growth. Okay? However, this theory is a bit arbitrary because these needs and the order of these needs is not universally fixed. In some other cultures, this idea of status is more important than family. Okay? So these needs can be switched in other cultures. So it's not universally the same. So there's always going to be exceptions. And then finally, we have our cognitive dissonance theory. So the word dissonance means inconsistency or difference, okay? And so when we have a dissonance, when we have an inconsistency between our attitudes and our actions, we have anxiety, okay? That's the idea. So let's think about this theory. You might believe, or I might believe, that smoking and vaping is bad for me, right? Like I might know that or believe that. However, I'm still going to smoke or vape. This creates a sense of dissonance, okay? Turmoil or anxiety because I know that it's bad for me, but I still do it. And so this internal push and pull of like, I know it's bad, but I still want to do it, creates anxiety. And we're motivated to reduce that anxiety by solving that dissonance, by making my attitudes, fit with my actions, okay? That's the idea of cognitive dissonance theory.